What's up, you guys? Welcome to another developer interview here on Without Parole. Today we have a very special guest with us. He's the co-creator and writer of graphic novel Heart Attack, the co-writer of Mortal Kombat 11 and Injustice 2 at NetherRealm Studios, and he had a hand in Before Your Eyes and WrestleQuest. But most recently, he was a creative lead at Skydance games for Behemoth. His name is Shawn Kittelsen, and he's here with us today. What's going on, Shawn? Thanks for being here.
Hey, happy Friday.
That was a pretty good introduction, right?
That was a great introduction. That was I was like, wow, you got a whole bunch of my CV in there. I felt like it was like Shawn Kittelsen, this is your life.
Did I miss any big ones? I mean, like Before Your Eyes is a big one over here for us because, you know, we're big PSVR 2 gamers.
Oh yeah.
You know, but were there anything else that we should have been introduced you with? Something big?
No, I think you got them all. I mean, there's the way back when I worked at DC in the beginning of my career on the Arkham games, but that feels like ancient history now.
Dude, so like Arkham Asylum and Arkham City and all that
yeah,
stuff,
Arkham Asylum was the first game I put my hands on when I started my job at DC when I was a young assistant editor in interactive, which isn't even a title in games, but it was at DC at the time, and then the company restructured and moved everyone to LA, and I went over to LA and I became a creative executive there, and I worked on Arkham City, Arkham Origins, Arkham Knight. I was there for the beginning, the first like couple of years of Arkham Knight, the first Injustice game, DC Universe Online, Lego Batman 2, Scribblenauts. I was there in a golden age of licensed games for DC.
What's the difference between working in like these, you know, big AAA world of flat screen games and then moving on over to doing things like Before Your Eyes and then, you know, Skydance, which is very big in the VR space, but still I don't think has the same level of, you know, AAA budget as something like a Batman game.
Well, it definitely doesn't have the same budgets. I mean, it's a smaller market, so you gotta work within that market size. But
right.
It's very much the same. I mean, when I worked I'm not at Skydance, but previously as a Skybound, because I'm trying to work for all the Sky companies. And my dad joke about it is that in the inevitable AI apocalypse, I will work for Skynet. So I'll just have the trifecta there of Skies. But
that's a good
yeah,
job.
like at Skybound was neat because I had this opportunity. I was working on Walking Dead stuff and Invincible and all that, which was cool. I was still tapping into like global franchises, and that's how I met Skydance, because I worked on Saints and Sinners from the Walking Dead side, and I also got the opportunity to like develop this slate of indie games. And Before Your Eyes was this game that came through as a demo from these. It had come out of some college students, and they were just brilliant, and it made everyone cry.
Every time you blink, you're going to jump forward in time. Could be a second, could be 5 years.
Like just the demo. It wasn't even the full game, but the demo made us all cry, and that was an instant, we have to pick this up, we have to publish this. And so championing that game, and then knowing that game still stands out for folks, and especially people who got to play it, I think, on PSVR 2 got the best experience, because the eye tracking is even better on the PSVR 2 than it is with like a webcam or with the mobile phone. It's just so much more immersive to be in there, and trying not to cry while you're just being put through this emotionally, like, just such an impactful story, and then saying like, no, keep your eyes open. Let them get really dry and misty, but don't blink. Don't blink or your life moves on. That's a once in a lifetime kind of experience working on that game. But the difference is really scale, the number of people. But Skydance is Behemoth now. We have about 100 people in the studio. It's a pretty large team for VR. So relative to AAA, it feels the same. And we're using all the same tools in Unreal and all of that. It's just the difference of scale. Like, you go back to the peak of the Rocksteady days, or working with NetherRealm, and you're talking about more like 100 times however many people were working on those games at a time, 300, 400, or, you know, with externals like 500 or 600. So it gets to a point though where it's just like kind of abstract, that scale, right?
Yeah.
You know, like what's the difference between a million and a billion? I don't know, a zero? Like, it's just too hard to comprehend.
I'm seeing it from a very limited point of view. I'm seeing my audience, and I'm seeing a couple reviews from people that I'm familiar with. But what was the overall reception to Behemoth at launch? Was it pretty positive overall?
Yeah, at launch, super positive. Like launch day, we were all feeling really great. And what we had been able to ship and finish for day one on PlayStation and PC. And then even though the meta version was a little bit further behind, it was still it was ahead of where our submission build had been for PlayStation, and our pre-release submission build for PlayStation was extremely outdated. We made a note about that in our review notes, which I've learned people don't read. So now, lesson learned there. But the day of launch, we were all feeling really good. And then, last week we had our big patch come out. We felt really good about that too. But along the way, there were definitely some zingers in reviews that came out that it's been like you get to a point in games where you kind of have to be a nerd to criticism too much, and you just have to trust in the audience. And when we see the player scores, like the thing that means the most to me beyond a Metacritic score really is, are players playing the game and enjoying it? So when I see the PlayStation Store and we're at like a 4.65 or 6.6 or something, and we've got over 700 reviews, that to me is, there it is. There's my satisfaction. Players are playing the game and enjoying it. You have to really have a strong gut, and I've been in games for, like I said, like 15 years now. Over 15 years, I'm getting old. Every now and again, you're going to get those ones that are like, great combat, great graphics, amazing boss fights. I hate the checkpoints, 2 out of 5. You're like, oh, okay, well, and I
guess I am a little more well-versed with all the reviews than I thought I was, because I actually know which one that was.
Oh, yeah, no.
Okay.
We're keeping track, but it's not, you can't have a personal response to that, right? You can't take it personally, even though it does, like, it hurts, it sucks. I think sometimes people take for granted when they're getting really in love with their verbal beatdown, that there are human beings making this stuff. Like, and not just like, I think it's easy to say like, oh, Skydance, part of a big corporation. Didn't they do something with Paramount this year? They must be a soulless, like, corporate monolith, a beast. And it's like, no, we're actually just 100 ordinary folks that really love VR games. And even so, like, being part of a larger company, yes, like, we didn't have to go out and beg people for funding. We were really fortunate to be in a place, but like a game like Behemoth wouldn't happen without a company like Skydance backing us. Right. Like there was a great deal of belief and support that came from Skydance corporate all the way up to David Ellison, who's been a huge champion for VR. I mean, he invested in the studio in 2016 and brought the workshop into Skydance and formed Skydance Interactive. It wasn't conventional thinking that leads you there. And it's certainly not a cash grab to say, let's go into a new market and spend a lot of money on really high quality experiences. I think it speaks to the company's belief in, hey, there's something new here and there's something promising, and we want to be a part of that. And we'd rather make something cool and special than make something safe. So yeah, it's been a rocky road though, man. It's an emotional roller coaster. You're like, hey, this review says we're one of the best VR games ever, and we're their game of the year, and they love us. And then this review says we should all die. That's, you got to deal with that though.
Yeah, I mean, I laugh, but that has been one of my least favorite things about getting into the game space and covering games over the last decade, is that people have lost the humanity and their ability to speak, and it lost any kind of empathy for the person they're talking to. I've seen numerous times, people trying to dox developers or saying that they should all die in a fire, and it's like, bro, like, I kind of miss the days, man. Like I miss I'm getting up there in age too, and I just kind of miss the days when a new game would come out and you had no input on that whatsoever. Like, it's like, oh, hey, here's the new LucasArts game. Here's the new Sierra Online game. Here's the new whatever. And it's like, you go to the store, you buy the box, you bring it home, and like whatever they created for you, that's it. Like, that's their vision, and that's the end of the story. And you either liked it or you didn't like it, but like, there was no anger associated with it like there is today. Gamers are fucking angry, and like, it's so disheartening. It makes it a space where you don't even want to be sometimes.
Yeah, it's disheartening, and it's just, you have to have the perspective that there's a magnification effect that comes from digital media where that anger feels so loud and so real, and then it's really important to go out and sort of touch grass with the real world, and talk to people and find out that what you made was pretty cool. So and you have to have that faith in it. Like, I love playing our game. I've played it front to back on every platform. And if I didn't love it, I would have fought releasing it. I mean, we delayed it. We delayed it from last year to this year. We delayed it from November to December. Like, we fought for every day and hour that we could afford to make the best possible game. And we made decisions along the way to make the best possible game too. We cut things, we changed things, but what we put out there wasn't something that we felt bad about, like, or we wouldn't have put it out there. I'm pretty positive that if I had come in and said, like, this game is an absolute turd and it's going to destroy our reputation, I don't think we would have released it. I think people would have listened because there's so much invested, and the team. Like, when I play a game that I would want to play. And that's all I can trust, ultimately. Like, I have to believe that I still have some humanity in me, and that there are going to be other people who feel the same way that I do about it.
This is the perfect segue, because this is exactly what I want to talk about now.
Yeah.
The very first teaser we ever saw for Behemoth said coming late 2023. And the fact that it did get a full year delay was pretty amazing. And let's go as far back as we can. When did development, like actual development, begin on Behemoth? How many years has it been?
So development began back when I was still at Skybound. So I started at Skydance in mid 2023, and the game, I believe, was being worked on as early as 2022, 2021.
Okay.
I think there had been like the bones of it in 2021, but you got to remember, again, Skydance is not a massive team relative to AAA. And you think about the number of AAA studios that can work on more than one game at a time, there aren't that many, right? Like, we're not getting Insomniac Spider-Man 2 and then Wolverine the next year. So you had a lot of the team still working on ports of Saints and Sinners to different platforms. You had a lot of the team working on Saints and Sinners Chapter 2. And then you had like a small incubation group working on Behemoth.
Right.
And I think there's, to an extent, marketing got a little carried away with how ambitious they were being with like, no, we can hit this timeline. And I think that the studio, to some extent, may have had, maybe they were still drunk from the success of Saints and Sinners. And they were like, we can do anything now. And then it turns out that mission was so much harder. That CG trailer promises so much. It promises you're going to be able to climb on these giant beasts. It promises you're going to be able to use your grappling hook to grapple to a tree stump and rip it out and hit enemies with it. And the game had to live up to all of that. And in 2023, it didn't. There's just, we could play a build of it and just feel this isn't there. And so much changed in between now and then. everything from the scale of the boss fights. The Shackle Hide was half the size a year and a half ago.
Wow.
It was just not big enough.
Right.
We played it, and we're like, is this really that big? And you would kind of look at it and think, I've seen a troll in Resident Evil 4 in VR that looks about that big. And you couldn't climb on it. It didn't have multiple phases. It was a much more straightforward encounter, and it felt anticlimactic. So we had to build that stuff out. We had to be real with ourselves about, hey, this could be better, right? We could do a lot more. And then there were other things about the game that just weren't clicking either. We had parrying was mapped to a button press. So instead of swinging against the angle of attack, you would hold your sword as if you were just blocking, and then you would time a trigger press to parry.
Interesting.
And people could not get the hang of it. Like, it was really, really, the game was, I think, at odds with itself too for a while. It was a Souls-like game. It was a survival game. It was a Shadow of the Colossus inspired boss fights game. Like, and all of these things were pulling against each other. So there was a goal to say, we need to make this much more of a cohesive experience and feel like one grand adventure, instead of, hey, sometimes this game is just kicking my ass, and then other times it's really kicking my ass, and then other times it's burying my ass in the backyard in an unmarked grave. And you're like, well, not many people are going to get through this if we're going to build all these awesome behemoth fights and different levels and stuff. If we're just burying it, how long are we expecting people to take? And the user feedback that we were getting, the testing feedback that we were getting was, yeah, it's not there. The grapple hook functionality wasn't all there. You couldn't do all the things that you would expect to do having seen the trailer. So we worked really hard to make it that game, to make it as bring it as close to the trailer as we could, and to make everything as bigger, add more climbing, give more functionality to the grapple, and then make sure that the combat system retained this kind of Souls-like inspiration of blocking and parrying gameplay and stamina drain, which some people love, and some people are like, get that out of my game.
Yeah.
And now you can. but balancing all of that was why we pushed it. We were like, it wasn't there. It wasn't the game that we wanted to launch. So pushing it to this year gave us that time that we needed to rethink everything and take what we had and remix it, remash it into the thing that it became today.
So there's no world where this game was releasing last year. Like, that just wasn't going to happen at any point. Because on Gamescast, what I'm trying to get at is, a lot of times I'm like, I want to know what this game was like last year at this time, you know. And so that just wasn't a possibility. There was no chance it was going to come out. Okay. No,
it wasn't a possibility, and the conversations were like, well, what about early 2024? And we were like, nah.
Still no. So we had sent Wes, my co-host, to go play a live demo of this game. I think it was one of the first live demos.
In May. I was there in the room with him. Yeah.
Excellent. And so he came back with some B-roll, and there was crafting at that point.
Yes.
Can you tell me, because I love crafting, and I love any reason to explore, and you know what? I think it was Saints and Sinners that caused me to fall in love with crafting. So it's really your fault that I was looking for crafting in the next Skydance game. Because prior to Saints and Sinners, I didn't care that much about that. But man, I love progression systems, and I love like feeling like, that my time spent in this environment, with Saints and Sinners specifically, ignoring the story for days at a time and just going and scavenging, like that was Saints and Sinners for me. And so what happened with the crafting, and how deep did it go? Did it ever get to a point where like you were crafting multiple items, or was it all just health stuff? I really want to let our viewers know, like, the pieces of the game that
what happened to crafting
are no longer in the game.
I feel like I'm gonna break your heart. Well, realistically, the crafting that we wanted to create for the game there were two problems with it. One was, it was pushing the scope of the game to where we wouldn't be able to polish other areas of the game if we kept building it out to what we wanted it to be. The other was that even in its incomplete form, the feedback that we were getting from players was that it was slowing the game down too much. And we had to have this real hard conversation with ourselves about what kind of game are we making and what kind of game do we want this to be. And everyone agreed that it had to be this big, like, the measure of all things in the game was the Behemoth battles. It's like, what are you doing in between Behemoth battles?
Right.
You have to have huge environments to look at, so you're not just like, I was in a corridor this whole time and then I came out in a big arena and fought something. But we also knew that we wanted to have this variety of action and puzzle solving and all of that. And those things we got good marks on in user testing. Crafting, we didn't. Crafting was, hey, you're telling me to go forward and fight and risk it all in these fights and come out feeling like I barely made it through by the skin of my teeth. And then you're telling me I can't heal myself because I have to stop and rummage and craft all the things that I need to heal. Or you're telling me that I can't fire explosive arrows until I stop to craft them. And it did turn into this. How many hours of this game is going to be spent crafting? That, again, is not the same. With Walking Dead, for example, and like, you know, I was one of the people on the Walking Dead side pushing crafting hard as a value of that franchise, right? You want to rummage through every cupboard and every shelf, and you want to be able to physically crouch to do that. You want to do all these things. Remember Crouchgate for people who are like, is Skydance aware of what the community is talking about? Yes, we are. But like, those things were essential to a more intimate, slower paced experience, where your experience of combat was even going to be slower paced, right? You never really, it's hard to, even if you could cut through swaths of walkers with your weapons, they were going to break.
Right.
So you had to be way more methodical about picking your battles and trying to avoid battles and stealthing around. And anytime you have a game with stealth, it slows things way down. And in this game, we were like, stealthing isn't fun because you're never going to stealth around a giant behemoth. They already don't care that you're there half the time. Like after Shacklehide and Night Scraper to an extent, like Dreadstag just doesn't give a fuck. Dreadstag is like, oh, you're there? I'm just going to step my foot down, but I'm not really, I'm going to shake a little bit. I don't really care about you. You insignificant bug. But so when you have crafting and you inject all these things, you take the current playtime for a Behemoth. To finish the game is about 10 to 12 hours. For most players, we're seeing that track through our telemetry. So that's your average playthrough for someone who isn't trying to speed run, but also isn't trying to be a completionist. If you inject 6 hours of crafting, that's a much longer play experience, and that means that there's far fewer people who are actually getting to see the end of the game. And that was a big issue for us because the Behemoth bosses were really expensive set pieces in terms of time, effort, and money. And we wanted players to play them. So if we saw crafting being an impediment, and it was even the thing that, like, some players really liked putting herbs in a pouch and shaking them and making a medicine pouch out of it. And then other players were like, can you please just give me medicine? Can you please? Or can you make it easier? Can I batch craft these? And then we were like, oh. And then it was like, oh, can you craft anywhere? And we tried thinking through that and how that would work, and it just turned into, wow, we're really making the player work just to get a health packet in a game where we're going to be beating you up and taking your health down constantly. And then the resources that we added on top of that, I think there is a different version of that game, but we definitely had a target in mind of not trying to make a 20 to 30 hour game this time, because the truth is most Saints and Sinners players, for that game being the VR classic that it rightfully is, most players don't get past hour 8 or hour 9. So that means we built all this content that there's a hardcore group that loves it, and I'm one of them, but the majority of people never saw. So we were really looking at how can we deliver the most value in the time that we have, and not pad it out with all of this extra gameplay. Plus, once we did, I know I'm just giving you the longest answer on this, but I'm going to give you all of it, Brian. I'm not going to hold it back.
No, this is great. You're making me work less. I can just sit back and enjoy.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
You can tell I've been working on this game for a long time, and I just want to spill my guts now. But like you look at that first, we wanted physical crafting. We didn't want you to just open up the notebook and poke at things or anything like that.
Yeah.
We wanted there to be a process. We wanted you, when you take your weapon to the forge, that you would have to, put your weapon on the anvil, select your upgrade, and then put the koloss into the forge. And then once the forge lifts, have to hammer it out and just feel some physical process there. Taking that to the next level for every crafted item would have required a lot more extensive development and polish on individual features and mechanics that, again, would have extended both the learning curve for players, because you would have had to learn how to craft all these different items, and it would have added more time, because again, you're how many steps are you asking? You know how many conversations we had even with the medicine pouch, or just like, how many shakes this is the worst motion to make with just a free hand, but how many shakes does it take to shake that pouch? And we had the 1 shake, the 2 shake, the 5 shake version, and we settled on a 1, 2, 3 was the fastest and the most, but without seeming insignificant, that we could come up with.
Right.
So those are hard design discussions, man.
Oh, I bet. You touched a little bit on, the stuff that happens between Behemoth fights. And,
Yeah.
I think it took me about 90 minutes or so, because I take my time with games and I really want to make sure I explore every single corner for collectibles or whatever it might be. And so it took me about 90 minutes, I think, to get to the first Behemoth. And I thought that was really good pacing, right? I felt like it was building up to that. There were like hints of that Behemoth, in the background, he gave you enough to know what you're working towards. And then I think between the first and second Behemoth, it was like 4 hours for me. Which,
that's a long run for you, yeah.
Yeah, it seemed especially long. And so then I started thinking, and we've been doing our best to avoid spoilers. So I've been saying a handful of Behemoths, but I think most people who
There's
know,
4 of them.
There we go. All right, I'll mark this as a spoiler interview. There's 4 of them. And and so I kept thinking, I was like, man, I wonder how many Behemoths were initially supposed to be in Behemoth, because it feels like there should have been at least one between the first and second one in terms of pacing, in terms of like how I experienced the game, because it just felt like the whole game was, I made a lot of jokes about how the game should have been called On the Way to the Behemoth, because that was felt like the
great Behemoth hunt,
right? And so it's so tough to compare Behemoth to something like Shadow of the Colossus, right? Like just this absolute classic by a legendary team who probably had all the Sony money they could possibly want to develop the game, and probably as much time as they wanted to develop it. But that game had like 16 Behemoths, and that was 20 years ago. How many Behemoths got cut during the development of Behemoth?
So I don't actually know how many were there before I was there, but we did have to cut a couple of Behemoths once I got there. And that was really a function of, are we going to try to add these extra Behemoths, or are we going to try to make the Behemoths really, really awesome? Yeah. Like that was, and it was, like I said, making Shacklehide twice as big, making sure there were multiple phases to each Behemoth fight, getting far more ambitious than, like, the original plan for Dreadstag was not that you would be climbing and grappling all over Dreadstag. The original plan was there were going to be these platforms all around, and you were going to have to get to the platforms and then attack with the bow and never really mount the creature until the very, very end. And that just, like, it all felt wrong. So the hard discussion was, we need to deliver on climbing on these things. We need to deliver on the real fantasy of fighting these giants in the way that players are imagining fighting them. And then when you look at something like Shadow of the Colossus, and I was really careful in interviews, like in discussions when we had, like in May when we did the previews with folks like Wes and some of the people who loved the game in previews, then later gave us less than favorable reviews. But like I was very careful to say, this game is not Shadow of the Colossus. You are not going to get as many Behemoths as you had Colossi. but we are doing all these different things that Shadow of the Colossus doesn't do. We have a lot more puzzle solving in between. We have a lot more combat in between. Like the human scale combat was as important to us because we knew that you were going to be on the ground for a chunk of time. And frankly, realizing the kind of exploration and vast environments for exploration that Shadow of the Colossus has still isn't really feasible on most VR hardware. It's really difficult to pull. It's really difficult to pull off what we pulled off in the first place. And some people will go out and say, like, well, that's because the quest is limiting things. And it's like, nah, man. The thing that's limiting things is that you have to render the game twice. You have to render it once in each eye.
Right.
And you're also modeling and managing all of these different physical systems and all of this different tracking systems that you're not managing in like motion tracking and all of that you're not managing outside of VR. There's a reason why it's been 20 years since Shadow of the Colossus, and even that team hasn't made another Shadow of the Colossus. Right. That game, I imagine at the time, it is a miracle that game existed at all, and it would still be a miracle if someone were to make a game like that today that was just one after another boss fights like that. But it wasn't really an option for us ever. I do think, you know, on the pacing side of it, like there are definitely areas where the pacing would benefit from some speeding up, but we can't cut the game down now that it's out. And you can get to Night Scraper faster. Like you can get from the beginning of the game to Night Scraper in like a total of 4 hours. But it also sounds like you took your time and enjoyed the world and exploring it and digging into the nooks and crannies and rummaging. So one, I thank you for the diligence of your playthrough. But I do agree that like, all right, all things, if we were to do a sequel, how would we pace it? I think we'd try to pace it a bit tighter. You know, one of the things that we really put some effort into that, again, was not part of the initial plan. And the initial plan was the behemoths are going to be very, very mysterious, and you're not going to see them until the fight.
Yeah.
And I hated that. Like, that was one of the things I asked the team to change first up when I came in was we have to show players a behemoth within the first 15 minutes, or we are selling ourselves short.
Right.
Like we ended up having even faster than that in the Blizzard sequence in the very beginning. Over the intro, the title, you can see like Shacklehide through the snow, and then you get the ball smash cinematic sequence, which that was actually the first like cinematic sequence that we produced for a behemoth to demonstrate what we wanted to have in the game of like the behemoths need to be present in the world. They need to show up on your way to hunting them. And then the idea was that it was this hunt, that you were sort of figuratively and in many cases literally climbing a mountain to get to the behemoths, so that when you got to them, it felt like, oh, I've seen them. I've had these teases. I've fought my way through it, and I've really earned my way to it. So I'm glad at least that you felt satisfied when you got to Night Scraper, because that was the idea. It was like you would get to the top of that castle and be like, oh shit, it's about to get really real, and then hopefully get the payoff of, wow, this was worth the climb.
Yeah. You know, one of the things I complain about in VR games constantly is that there's just people have just given up on making boss fights, period. Like, I mean, so the fact that you've got a game that is like, hey, we called our game boss fights. I was like, this is wonderful. I'm thrilled about this. You know, Metro didn't have any boss fights. You know, Alien Rogue Incursion didn't have any boss fights throughout the course of the game until the end. It feels like studios have given up on that, and I understand the reasoning. Right, making a boss fight can be extremely time consuming, and when you're trying to make deadlines, it's like it's going to be one of the first things you're going to cut. But when I got to the second behemoth, I was like, oh, is the second behemoth just a boss fight? Like, I'm running around on the ground, I'm shooting arrows, taking down weak spots, and part of me was like, that's fine. Like, I just need more boss fights in my game. So the fact that this is just a boss fight in the traditional sense is great. So when it became more than that, that's when I went from being like, oh, this game's fun, to being like, this game's fucking amazing. You know what I mean? Like that 4 hours that I had spent getting to that point suddenly was like, oh, this was totally worth the 4 hours it took to get to this point.
Yeah, it's funny. When we pivoted to say no, we have to fix this game and we're not releasing in 2023, I kind of scared everyone, including my bosses, by saying I think we need to make the game a lot shorter to be able to finish it. And credit to Brian Murphy, who is the game director, and the entire team working with me in Skydance, that they all sort of placated me with, sure, Shawn, yeah, 8 hours, sure, we can make a game that big. And then they went and made a much bigger game. Like, if you try to complete the game, like, I can run the game in 9 to 10 hours because I know where everything is and I know how to do everything and solve every puzzle and where to find it. A true completionist run we've seen people take anywhere from 15 to 20 hours to really pick their way through the game and to find every collectible and, you know, every lore object and do all that stuff. But so credit to the team for listening to me and not listening to me and say, no, we could pack so much more into these. And the longest level is actually the Dreadstags biome, the swamp area with all the mud and clay and stuff, which it does feel like as you go in, it's like, here's Shacklehide, here's the length of the Night Scraper level, and then here's the Dreadstag level. It's like the levels get bigger and the trails get longer as you get to these bigger and bigger behemoths, and then it kind of compresses back down a bit for the final boss, the Hollow King. But that journey was something that I think we're really happy with the length of the game, because we don't want players to feel like they're only getting 4 to 6 hours of gameplay, and we want them to feel like they're getting a complete experience. It's a really hard thing to juggle, and I'd be interested in your opinion on this, because you're playing all these games and you're seeing all these different things, and you have things like Subside that are just beautiful, just wonderful immersive experiences, and you're just happy to be there. And I'm so glad that Subside came to PSVR 2 so that more people can experience it, because it was one of my favorite games of last year. But
it's one of my favorite of this year, and people are like, how could you possibly give this a better score than Behemoth or a better score than Alien? I was like, because when I was playing Behemoth and Alien, all I wanted to do was swim around in Subside. Like,
that's, you know what? Right? I'm not going to hate on that.
Nope.
it's got the most beautiful water.
Some games can be stressful sometimes. Like, you're fighting for your life in in Behemoth. You're fighting for your life in Alien. You just it's nice to not fight for your life and just be like, oh hey, coin, clink.
I mean, one of my favorite VR games is still, like, I've been a Beat Saber person for forever.
Me too.
Like, I love Beat Saber, the simplicity of Beat Saber. That Metallica pack's just
so
difficult. Oh my god. I played for like 2 hours on my birthday, because I was like, oh, they put out a Metallica pack for my birthday this week. That's great. So I play for 2 hours, and the next day my whole back was sore, and I was like, there's that feeling. I mean, I wrote an article for Polygon back in like 2019 about how I was using Beat Saber as part of a fitness regimen, and it's just amazing. But what I find interesting about VR right now is there are games like Beat Saber, games like Walkabout, games like Subside, where you can go in and you can have a short experience and have it be extremely satisfying. And it does seem like that's what a lot of VR players want from the headset, is they don't want it to be their main. They want it to be the ride that they can go take. They want to go like dip into a theme park for 30 minutes to an hour and then get back to their regularly scheduled program. And then you have VR players who are like, nah, dog, I want to live in the headset. Like, I'm ready to go to that Snow Crash, that Neuromancer world. I want to live in the net. And I mean, I kind of fall into both camps depending on the game and the experience. I mean, how do you feel about that, just in terms of, are you split between what you like in your games? Like, sometimes you want Walkabout Mini Golf, and sometimes you want Behemoth.
Yes, because VR has changed me from a person who only liked flat screen horror, single player, narrative driven adventures, to somebody who just wants to experience everything, right? Because VR had changed that. I grew up, in the Commodore 64 days and the NES days, and after 30, 40 years of that, you go, I've kind of seen everything. VR changed that for me, where I said, hey, you put the headset on. My first headset was PSVR 1, right?
Mm-hmm.
So back 2016. And when I did that, I said, oh my God, Until Dawn, Rush of Blood, horror shooter, things that I like. I was like, this is great, but I want to see everything. I bought every single launch game that there was because I just wanted to see everything in VR. And then games like Starblood Arena came along. And I was like, oh, wait, do I like multiplayer games now? And then Firewall Zero Hour came out. And I was like, wait a minute, do I like tactical first-person multiplayer competitive shooters? And the answer is no. Up until that point, I didn't. But VR's changed everything for me. So I'm 100%, man. If you ask me right now, we can ditch this interview right now and go play a game of Phasmophobia together. I will totally do that with you, right? Because that's where I want to be. But I love, love, love the anticipation of the AAA full-length, single player narrative adventures that I always loved, right? So I am definitely split between the two, but I'm split between everything that comes to VR, because as much as the wow factor has worn off over the last 8 years of VR, there's still a wow factor every single time you start a new game in VR. And you're just like, what do these guys have in store for me? That little kid energy has never worn off completely for me. So it's a balance for me completely.
Yeah, I totally agree. I work at a VR studio, and I wouldn't if I felt otherwise, but it is a transformative experience. Or I always, especially in the early days, I refer to myself as a VR evangelist. Because I felt like I was like, I have been to the top of VR Mountain and I've come back with the good word of VR, and I would like you all to know there is another way to game with your body.
Why do we feel that way, and why do so many people not feel that way? Where does that come from?
I think a lot of people are like Garth in Wayne's World, in the scene where Rob Lowe is talking to him about isn't this great? You have your own TV show and your own set, and hey, I've been thinking about some changes. And Garth is just like, we fear change. I think that's most people's default, to fear something new and different. And I think in part it's because they fear that they're going to be physically uncomfortable with it. And there is an accessibility hurdle, I think, for VR that we need to overcome long term for people who are really motion sickness prone, that just can't seem to get it together. And the unfortunate current reality that we have is that to get over that first hurt, you have to actually, if you have that motion sickness bias or tendency, the only way out is through, right? So when in 2014, I think it was 2013 or 2014, I tried the Rift DK1 for the first time. The office that I was working at, one of our tech guys had a DK1, and he was like, who wants to play it? And I was like, oh, sign me up, dude. I want to see Half-Life in 3D. Let's do it. And I sit down in this office chair with an Xbox 360 controller and this bulky DK1 headset on, and I play Half-Life, and I'm amazed, and I'm converted, and I'm also sick as hell.
Yeah.
I got the headset off after maybe 20 minutes, and I'm sweating, and I've got to put my head between my legs, and I'm asking, does anyone have a brown paper bag that I could breathe in and out of? And then I had to pull my car over on the way home. An hour and a half later, I'm driving home, and I get another wave of motion sickness, and I have to pull over. And the same thing happened in 2016 when I played 3 VR demos at E3 that year. I played Arkham VR because my friends at Rocksteady were like, Shawn, we've got VR now. And I was like, oh, that's brilliant. And I remember doing the Saturday Night Fever dance as Batman in front of the mirror and being like, this is great. And then I played Gran Turismo. Then I go into Resident Evil 7. and I tear through that demo because I can feel the motion sickness coming on, but I'm just like loving it so much. And when I get through it, I take the headset off, and I remember the Capcom rep being like, "That's the fastest I've seen anyone complete that demo." And I was like, "That's because I'm gonna hurl. I need to go." And I remember I needed my friend to like carry me, like shoulder me out to a seat and get over it. And then I've never been motion sick in VR again. And I've played, Lone Echo with the Z-axis turned on, so I can flip in every direction and do all the zero-G stuff. Nice. I played To the Top and flung myself all over the place like a maniac. And it's great, by the way. I work with Dan Dunham now, who created To the Top at Skydance.
Yeah, you guys got to give him a little vacation so he can get To the Top on the PSVR too.
Man, I want him to. I would love for him to make To the Top too. He's shown me stuff, and I'm like, this is so good. Yeah, but like,
he's amazing. I love him.
He is. I mean, we have an amazing team, and I think that's the thing. You have all these people who clearly we all fell in love with it, like you did, and we got through those first early days of finding our legs in VR, and then once you found them, you have them for life. It's like riding a bike.
Right.
It turns out the Resident Evil thing isn't even a VR thing. It's something to do with the RE engine and the way that they handle motion blur and chromatic aberration.
Really?
It doesn't sit with me on flat either. If I turn off motion blur and chromatic aberration on an RE engine game, it's gravy. I can play all day. But if you put it on, it makes me sick, whether it's flat or in VR. Nothing else in VR makes me sick. And I mean, I played a lot of really buggy work in progress builds for Saints and Sinners and for Skydance's Behemoth, where, my goodness, man, the things you could do to yourself. I always explain to people when they're like, how hard can it really be to make bosses like the Dreadstag in a game like Behemoth? And it's like, well, just imagine you've got something the size of a skyscraper. It's completely rigged with physics. So you've got like real life physics systems on it. You've got a player capsule that is also rigged with physics. You've got a rope that is rigged with physics. And all of these things are simulating real weight and kinetic force. And if you have Dreadstag takes a step and moves its arm, and the player is attached to its wrist by a grapple, the player is now moving at over 100 miles an hour. Like, so you go from 0 to 100 so fast. And before we were able to put like the proper controls on it and stuff, I mean, we had to change the speed of the Behemoth when you're moving on it. We had to adjust all of these things. There was all kinds of crazy jitter and things that could happen where you just feel like you're shaking and vibrating all the time. Then there were things where you would be on the rope and you would get flung and just sort of endlessly spin.
Oh man.
Which was awesome. It was awesome in like a thrill ride kind of way, but it was also like this gonna hurt somebody. Like we can't leave this in a commercial game.
Right. Obviously, there's been a lot of changes in Behemoth since launch. You guys listened a lot to the community and made a lot of big changes that I did not expect to see at all, or even so soon. Should we be expecting more changes to come in, or like what's the roadmap looking for Behemoth?
So I mean, the biggest thing on the roadmap is Arena Mode 1.0.
Okay.
We really want Arena Mode to be. There's a reason we put the beta label on it. It's just we wanted something that's more robust and more feature complete. And the campaign itself that's a complete game, but Arena Mode is not. The Arena Mode, we wanted to have more of a sense of progression for the player. We want more arenas for the player. We want even things like leaderboards and opportunities to score the player. So Arena Mode is going to get a pretty big build out in 2025. That's our main focus. And then in the main game, we're going to continue tweaking things and adding options. Like, I think, without making any promises, because we have to, everything is bound by the laws of time and money.
Right.
We were exploring things like additional difficulty modes. We're exploring different modifiers and options that we can have. Things like we did with freestyle mode, that some people really, really didn't like the stamina system being a part of the gameplay. Now, to us, as designed, it's like, well, the stamina system is a way of you maintaining that there is real weight to these objects. And if you give someone, I don't know if you've ever swung a 20-pound sword.
I try not to.
Yeah, we have one. We actually made one. We can't do anything with it. It was forged. It's a genuine like steel weapon. So we can't really take it to trade shows and stuff like that. Like if we took it to Gamescom, somebody would have been killed. Yep. It's just too easy. We almost killed each other with it at the office. Like it was like we had to have like health and safety there around us to supervise us. But like you swing a weapon like that, your arms get pretty gassed out on a much faster timetable even than the stamina drain in the game. But and then you swing it against something and you actually strike something and you have to then take the reverberations and all of that force. But we're going to keep tuning systems like that, tuning difficulty. I think New Game Plus is something we'd really, really love to add. And then the ultimate stretch goal, which I'm only mentioning it because so many players have asked for it, and I just don't know if it's even possible, is boss rush. Like, I don't know if a boss rush mode, just because of the way that the battles are structured, but we've talked about all kinds of options. So that's an example of the conversations we're having of
nice.
We want to make this game the best game it can be and put the most value into it. And then in terms of additional content or anything like that, that's all also under discussion right now. But the biggest thing, and lest anyone here think Skydance doesn't sound like they have a roadmap at all. Well, folks, we were very focused on finishing the game for this year. We actually have a pretty good roadmap, but what we have is a menu that we're going to make choices from, and a lot of those choices are being driven by the feedback we get from the community. I think it would have been really presumptive of us to say we've got it all mapped out. We don't need to listen to you guys. Like we're reading posts, we're in the forums, we're watching Gamescasts and all that stuff. We're taking notes on what it is that people want. That's the way it should be, because we're not making the game for ourselves. I mean, we're making a game that we ourselves want to play, but we're making it to share with players. So if players want certain things in the game, we want to try and service that as much as possible. And I think, speaking right to it, I know there's a lot of players who are like, Chapter 2 didn't get the support. Nah, it didn't. But this game is getting support and will be supported for a long, long time, because we care about it, we spend a lot of time on it, and we believe that it has the opportunity to find a really big audience. But if we were to stop supporting it, I don't think it ever finds the audience that it really deserves.
Yeah. Well, listen, you said New Game Plus, and I think I tuned out immediately after that, and like my heart just started racing and go, please, 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 please. So I apologize if I missed out on any of the important things you were saying. But New Game Plus is definitely that's my number one for any game. Like I because especially with the upgrade system that you have, you can only upgrade so much depending on how many materials you find throughout your adventure. I want to play on Barbarian mode, but I want to play on Barbarian mode, but taking in the stuff that
with
I've
all your
already
stuff.
got. Exactly.
Yeah.
So New Game Plus on a harder difficulty is like usually my number one thing that I'm looking for after I complete a game. So the fact that you're even considering that makes me very happy. If maybe somebody over there could convince people to get New Game Plus into Archangel.
I wonder
Archangel
if we still
from
have the source
2018.
code for Archangel. That's
right.
Well, I'm glad you remember that game, because I had a lot of fun with that game too. Like I think
Archangel was great. That game was way. The production values for that were just insane for basically what was essentially a rail shooter.
And that's a core. And I think every team has its own personality and DNA, and ours is this really funky combination of like Skydance is a company known for blockbusters like Mission Impossible and Top Gun Maverick and stuff like that. It's like, okay, so we're Blockbuster. We want to bring blockbuster production values and personality to our games. But then there's this other side that's like, we're also mad scientists working out of a garage. Like we're Doc Brown, like making a flux capacitor with some like nuclear stuff.
All right, I know we're running a little bit long here, so I do want to ask you
no worries.
A few rapid fire questions. First rapid fire question.
Rapid
The first Behemoth has what looks like an entire village on its back, trees and snow, and so when I first saw it, I could not wait to get up there and run around and see the world moving. Was that ever in the design documents? Was that ever something that was being planned on being done? Like, were you supposed to be able to get up on his back and run through the trees as if it was its own world?
No, we wanted that. I wanted that, but it wasn't built for that initially, and it getting that to work was out of the scope. But I'm not going to say never, because I'd love to revisit that, because I agree it would be awesome to get all the way up there. There's a whole ecosystem of birds and things that live up there. Like, you want to meet them.
Right, exactly. It'd just be so cool that on the horizon, like the world is just moving up and down. It might trigger motion sickness, but in all the best ways. Can you tell me can you describe any behemoths that were cut from the game to your knowledge? Any that you can think of off the top of your head?
There's one that I'm thinking of, but I can't describe it because I still want to do something with it. I don't want to spoil it.
All right.
And then there's one that was cut that I will talk about, because I think we cut it for the right reason. It was a mole behemoth, and you were kind of going to stumble around in the dark, like trying to avoid it by not moving. And it just felt like it was the weirdest concept for a behemoth, and it was one that when we cut it, I felt like it was the right move, because it felt like behemoth battles should be big and kinetic and emphasize motion, where something that forced you to slow down and or not move felt kind of like this is weird. This is not quite the experience. So that's an example of something that we cut, because we talk about everything, but it doesn't all fit in the game.
For sure. Were there just like 100 suggestions over at Skydance of people being like, what if we did one of these? You just had like a list of like possibilities.
Oh yeah. And I mean, and from the silly, like, what if there's a poop attack to like the, oh my gosh, that's amazing. But then we have to make the whole game about that. I mean, there were discussions about, should we make a whole game about one behemoth, where you just encounter the same behemoth over and over and over again, and find different ways to fight it and get, gradually get ever and ever further up it. So who knows, maybe if we ever do a sequel.
Which leads to the next question. What's Skydance working on next? There's no way you're going to be able to answer this.
There's no way. I mean, we're working on Arena Mode 1.0, and we're working on additional support for this game, and we are looking at some other projects that we're all really excited about that I can't wait to come back and talk about.
Obviously.
When I won't, like, I don't want the red dot to appear on my forehead and blow me away on this stream. That'd be a sad way to end it.
Right. Close your windows. Peter Ackerman can see you all the way across the city. The Beat Saber pack that you most desperately want but haven't gotten yet.
Ooh. This is where I'm going to reveal
Here we go.
My true nerdiness and eccentricity. I need a far more definitive K-pop representation than just BTS. Like, love to BTS, but like, give me Stray Kids, give me Twice, give me everybody on your stream is like, who are these? K-pop's great. I love me some K-pop. So I love a good K-pop pack, and then I think the other thing I would like is some more hip-hop representation, and I would definitely love a Run the Jewels pack. Would be pretty awesome. And if I'm gonna be doing some real Googling after this conversation's over. I don't know any of this. Oh man. Well, Stray Kids did a song for Deadpool and Wolverine called Chick Chick Boom that I just feel like, this would be a dope Beat Saber song. Run the Jewels is one of my favorite rap duos of all time. And then I think if there was a third that I'd reach for, it's like we got Sweet Child of Mine in the rock mixtape pack. I would just love a straight up all the Guns N' Roses hits. Yep. Like, just give me, just give me whole albums of Guns N' Roses. I would love that.
Shawn, you're such an interesting person, and I feel like we could talk about VR and go way off topic. Not even talk about Behemoth for like 5 hours. So I really do hope that we get to reconnect at some point soon and have another conversation about VR or whatever Skydance is working on.
Hey, anytime you want to talk VR, again, I'm playing everything, and I've been a fan of your guys' content for years now, and it was cool to meet Wes, and it was cool to engage with more people in the community. I'm always kind of a lurker. Like, there was like dropping into the chat for Gamescast last week was like, I'm gonna cross the barrier between lurker and active community member. But I'd come back and talk about anything. It doesn't have to be Skydance related. I just love to talk about games with you, man.
Nice, man. Well, every so often I do need a co-host for Gamescast Live, so maybe I'll hit you up next time somebody needs a day off.
Put me in, coach.
Excellent. Final request of you, Shawn.
Yeah.
And really thank you again so much for your time. This has been a real pleasure. We need for the community out there, all the game cats watching. We need a big meow and swipe from you.
Meow. Oh, that was nice. A weird one, wasn't it?
It was. Not what I expected.
Yeah. It was natural. I mean, I could have gone with like a meow, but like meow. There's even a K-pop song about meowing.
All right. Apparently it's going to be my next obsession. Please do. Yeah. All right, Shawn, thanks again, man. And we will definitely be in touch and talk soon.
Cheers, and thank you, Brian. Take care.
I thought I could be a hero and break the curse. But I was a fool. There is no hope here. And the gods that walk among us thirst for death.
Outsider! Your head is mine!
The poison in my veins begs me to kill.
I'll put you in the ground! The power of our god is immeasurable!
Thought I could be a hero. But heroes don't survive the Forsaken Lands.